Hi, this is Lucia with The Art of Love. This week I would like to talk about two things that will end almost any relationship. And those two things are jealousy and insecurity. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I recently read about the breakup of Mariah Carey and her boyfriend Bryan Tanaka. If you've been following that story, I've actually been around Mariah on several occasions because my friend used to manage her, and so I watched her reality show a few months ago and saw the developing story of her and the backup dancer. And I thought it was cool that she went from a billionaire to a backup dancer. You know, she doesn't discriminate. I love that, and I was really rooting for them. But unfortunately, the story that came out is that because of his jealousy, she broke up with him because she was hanging out with her ex-husband that she has 2 children with, Nick Cannon, and he didn't like that. He didn't want her to do that. And so he was his own worst enemy. He was afraid that she would get back with Nick, and yet he was the one he should have been afraid of, the person looking back at him in the mirror, which was himself, because he caused his own demise. He caused what he was afraid was going to happen. That's the big irony. When people are jealous and insecure, they're so worried about everyone else, they're forgetting about themselves and about the fact that they're bringing about what they don't want to happen, because there was no way that Mariah and Nick were going to get back together. I mean, how often have you heard of a couple divorcing, especially a celebrity couple, and then years later getting back together? Except for Elizabeth Taylor, and maybe there's one other example I can't think of. Usually, once they're divorced, that's it. Now, sometimes you hear of couples, they file for divorce and then they withdraw their filing. That happens a few times. But basically, once you're divorced, especially for a few years, and also the fact that Nick now has a child with someone else, there was no way they were getting back together. So if he had just been cool about it, and just say, hey, no problem, you go be with Nick. I think it's great. You guys are friendly now that you have kids. She would have loved that. It's like, oh, finally, someone understanding, someone that's not jealous. Especially if someone has children, you can't dictate to them how they're going to interact with their partner, because they still have to interact with the ex. And so there's no way around it. And so Bryan was afraid that she was going to prefer Nick to him, and he was probably also insecure because he's a backup dancer, so he doesn't have the millions that Nick does. But the fact is that no one can lower someone's interest level in you, because if you've heard my podcast before, you know that it's all about interest level. So let me explain this. Let's say that Mariah's interest in Bryan was, I don't know, let's say 80%, 80 out of 100, which is high. As long as he continued to behave, in a way that wasn't jealous and insecure, it would have remained there or even gone higher, depending on what happened. And even if she interacted with Nick, her interest level in him, let's say, was, well, they're divorced, so it would have to be under 50. Let's say it's 49. Okay, so the interest level are totally different. So just the fact that she was hanging out with Nick didn't mean that her interest in Bryan was going to go down from 80 to 70. That's not how it works. A person's interest in you stays where it's at and changes only according to what you do or don't do. See? And most people, they eventually end up screwing up and the interest level goes down, and that's how breakups occur. So as long as you know that it doesn't matter who else is in the picture, their interest in you is going to only be based on what you do or don't do, not on what anyone else is doing or don't do. That's why it's really, if you know what you're doing, if you're listening to me, you don't have to worry about anyone else that's in the picture, because eventually people, they do screw up. And as long as you are not acting out of insecurity and jealousy, then you will stay, and you don't have to worry about the person breaking up with you. So just be cool. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, or if you're interested in private coaching, you can contact me at my website, theartoflove.net. If you're listening to this on iTunes, I would appreciate if you would rate and review the podcast. And finally, remember that love inspires, empowers, uplifts, and enlightens.